The image you see here is an image or representation of Saint Teresa of Calcutta. I'm going to say a couple of things about what the religious situation of India is before I speak about her life directly. We can say, first of all, that really Christianity has very early roots in India. We see it traced in many all the way back to Thomas the Apostle, often known as Doubting Thomas, as in this particular depiction. But he's said to have ended his life in the Indian subcontinent. Nevertheless, Christianity is not the majority religion of the Indian subcontinent today. It's primarily Hindu and then also Muslim in some sections as well. Hinduism itself is already a complicated idea, right? It's a diverse and complicated tradition. Some scholars would even go so far as to say that there is no such thing as Hinduism, meaning that basically it was British colonizers who were trying to sort of categorize the religious practices of the time, and they came up with the word Hinduism to sort of just be an umbrella term for all of the things that the Indian people did in their various religious practices. So in other words, there might not be a lot that holds them all together. Nevertheless, Hinduism also is known for assimilating religious symbols from other religious traditions. So you'll see odd things like representations of like a Hindu kind of Jesus guy sometimes. Mary also is a prominent figure at times in Hinduism. Obviously, they understand Mary and Jesus in a different way than Christians do, and it's kind of odd to me, right? I don't really know what to feel about that. I'm uncomfortable, at least, right? But here's a map, though, just to give us a sense of like what the overall religious makeup of the Indian subcontinent is. Right, you'll see most of it has Hinduism as its primary religion. Then some sections up in the north have Islam. There's some Buddhism right up in the north, maybe close to Tibet there or something. And then Christianity, right, in some parts around where Mother Teresa herself lived. There's one other thing worth mentioning because it's related to Teresa's own ministry in India. It's the relationship between Hinduism and the caste system of that country. This is a complicated topic as well, right? In some cases, Hinduism has been seen to support this kind of caste system that stratifies Indian society and leads to inequities, essentially, right? That you're sort of born into a caste and you stay there no matter what. If you've seen my video on Henriette Delille, you'll remember that sort of ladder that I talked about in some French Creole society or French colonial society. And this is kind of like that. This caste system, though, traces itself back to an ancient Hindu legal text. Probably not going to pronounce it correctly, but the Manusmriti, I think, is something like it. And it identifies four main castes for ancient, and for ongoing Indian society. You can see them kind of in the background there, but here they are up close now. The Brahmins, right, are the leaders. They're the top. They come from all four of them sort of are parts of Brahman's body, which is one of these Hindu gods. So the Brahmins come from the top, right? Then the next ones come from their arms, and then from their legs, and then from their feet. And then the lowest caste, if you can even call them a caste, right, is the Dalit. They're the lowest, they're the outcasts, so to speak. So this is a historical fact about Hinduism and about India, but we should also sort of be careful maybe at times about how we speak about this, because I know, for instance, I actually had a professor who was Hindu in college, Anantanand Ramashan, and I had the pleasure of more recently having him as one of my colleagues at St. Olaf. He is Hindu, and he's written about this topic quite a bit, right? Trying to sort of think about the relationship between this world in Hinduism and, right, the next lives that Hindus often will sort of speak about one having after this life. And this is a more recent book of his that you see now, but then one of his earlier books is what he calls a Hindu theology of liberation, which, in other words, is attempting to address some of these issues around social inequities that sometimes seem to have been present in some forms of Hindu society. So I'm trying to put its best foot forward here, Hinduism's best foot forward here when I mention that then as well. So then back on to Mother Teresa herself. She was born in Skopje, North Macedonia, at least today that's the country that it's in 1910. At the age of 18, she left her hometown to join the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and in order to begin her ministry in India, in Calcutta, she first traveled to Dublin, Ireland. Now, why would she go to Ireland, right? Well, because India was one of the British colonial holdings in the 20th century, English was the language of instruction for the sisters that she had joined at that point. So she had to teach herself English before she could go teach in a predominantly Hindu right society. Okay, right. So that was up until 1947 when the British holdings in Indian subcontinent were finally split between the majority Muslim Pakistan and majority Hindu India. By the end of her life, though, Teresa could speak 5 languages: Bengali, Albanian, Hindi, Serbo-Croat, and English. So she did learn the local languages there in India eventually. She taught in India at a girls' school for 20 years, and she had a sort of a vision on a train ride in 1946 to begin a new religious order, which became eventually the Missionaries of Charity. Its missions centered on service to the poorest of the poor in Calcutta. They adopted a sari as their form of their habit, the form of dress. That's a local enculturation, you could say, I guess, of their habit, because that was a common and simple form of dress for women in that society. So they eventually spread beyond Calcutta and are now in many parts of the world, always serving the poorest of the poor in the societies that they find themselves in. Worth noting also that after her death, right, this was a bit of a scandal at the time. Some scholars got their hands on her personal journals and found that she had a very sort of dark underside, right? Not dark underside. She had dark experiences of her spirituality. She did not feel consoled or lifted up by God in her faith. And this is what the tradition has come to know as a dark night of the soul. She's not the first one to experience something like this. One of the more famous ones before her was St. John of the Cross in the 16th century, I want to say. This dark night of the soul is a prolonged period of spiritual desolation, which is experienced as a feeling of God's absence from one's life. So it's a form of suffering, honestly. I think it's best to think of it as a form of suffering that shares in Christ's suffering and the sufferings of the poor, right? And entering into solidarity with their experience of abandonment by society. And so what can we learn from her? Well, if we think about the fact of her desolation throughout her spiritual desolation throughout her life, we can also sort of see what hints of what it really means for us to be called to do what's right, even when we don't feel like it, right? It's very common for us to feel like we want to do something else, or that it's not like interesting or flashy or exciting to follow God's will for our lives. And so Teresa can be a real clear example of the fact that even if we don't feel like doing what we're called to do, that we should still do that. And it's hard and it's a profound lesson, really. It's hard to imagine like how you actually find the motivation to do such a thing, but she did. So in the symbol that Aaron Wee composed for us, that you see, we have a number of symbols that are worth mentioning here. We have, first of all, a red rosary, which is indicative certainly of her devotion to Mary, but also of her Albanian heritage. The flag for Albania is predominantly red in the background. Then you'll also see, of course, her sari, right? This is the symbol of her identity with the Indian people that she went to serve. And you'll see a white rose. This is, again, sort of her like handing over her will to God despite her feelings of desolation in her life. She receives God's will for her as a white rose, as a sort of a fiat. Fiat is the word that Mary says in the Latin translation of the New Testament, right? Be it done unto me according to thy word. And so with Mother Teresa too, she also hands her life over to God and says, be it done unto me, right? Even though I don't know why I'm doing some of these things, they're not fulfilling. It's also worth noting maybe that Mother Teresa's skin tone sort of shifted depending on what ministry she was doing. So during her street ministry, which we perhaps see here, right? She had darker skin tones at some points in her life. And the last thing then, just for further study, would be some other resources, right, that we can find. The first one that I'll mention here is, I believe, I have it on my shelf, but I think it has some primary source texts, in other words, writings by Mother Teresa about her desolation periods, right? It's actually, the subtitle for sure, that's the case. And it shows us a little bit more about how she struggled spiritually through some of the darker moments of her ministry in India. The second one is sort of a secondary biography, right? It's about her, not by her. These would be great, but there's also lots of other texts out there about Mother Teresa, and I encourage you to go explore.